Hello, welcome everybody. I'm here with Lisa Stringfellow. We're just gonna chit chat for a minute or two while everybody comes into the Zoom room. We're so happy to have you all here.
Hello.
Hello everyone. Thank you for coming. It looks like you are underwater, Lisa. It's such a fabulous, perfect backdrop.
One of my inspiration pictures that was in my Pinterest board for a long time.
I love it. Oh, there's Pam. I see Pam.
I see some familiar faces, I want to say, but names.
Zoom faces, I guess.
Yes.
Anyone who wants to, we love a lively chat, and we'll be taking questions for Lisa later on. So you're welcome to do the chat. You're welcome to do the Q&A. We're happy to have lots of activity and energy. We're envisioning you having lots of energy. And it's a perfect night to have a book chat, right? It's cold and rainy in New England. This is, we just
it's going to be in the 60s tomorrow, and then snow on Friday.
And then snow, New England.
Yes.
It's a good time of year for books. All right, well, I think we can get started. Everybody's trickling in. I'm sure we'll have some more friends in here soon. Welcome, everyone. So happy to have you here. My name is Casey Robinson. I'm the events manager at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Massachusetts. And we are so excited and delighted to have with us tonight the author, Lisa Stringfellow, whose debut middle grade fantasy book, A Comb of Wishes, just came out a couple of weeks ago. I'm gonna open out the screen here. Yes. So this is the cover. Isn't it awesome? Let's see if I can get it on the screen without question. So we are very excited to have you. And actually, Lisa, you are our kickoff children's literature guest of honor. So we're even more happy to start this 2020 season with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
So just a little bit about A Comb of Wishes, which, by the way, I totally devoured. And then my 9-year-old also devoured right after me. And I will start by saying, I heard her page turn, audible gasp. I said, oh, she's reading the book. I know exactly what part she's at. So that's a good testament to pick yourselves up a copy. Hi, Janet. See her in the chat. So just a little bit about our guest of honor tonight, Lisa Stringfellow. She writes middle grade fiction, and she has a not so secret fondness for fantasy with a dark twist. I'm pointing to the
scary mermaid.
The mermaid in the back. Lisa's debut just came out, and it was selected as an ABA Indie Introduced title for winter and spring 2022, which is a big deal, and an Indie Next Kids title for March and April 2022, which is also a big deal. The book is set against the backdrop of the Caribbean culture and folklore, and it's totally mesmerizing, and it tells the story of impossible wishes and magic based in the deepest kind of love. And if that isn't a description that will get you to pick up a copy of this book, I don't know what will. So thank you so much for being here. I thought we would talk a little bit, just initially, if you wanted to give any more of an introduction about Keela or the book, that would be great. In a minute, I'm going to have Lisa read just a little bit so you all can have a little taste of her delicious book.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, so the book is focused on 12-year-old Keela, who starts off, we see grieving for the loss of her mother. So it's, her mother has passed away in an accident, and she's really devastated by that. And so one of the things that she does is to collect sea glass. It's one of her hobbies, something that she used to do with her mother. And while she's on one of these excursions with a friend, she hears this mysterious sound, and her friend can't hear it. And she starts to wonder if it maybe is only for her. And she starts thinking about all the stories that her mother told her. because her mother collected folk tales and was sort of a cultural anthropologist. And so she follows the sound and she finds this mysterious box. And when she eventually gets it to open, she has this connection with this dangerous sea woman, mermaid named Ophidia. And she offers Keela, she wants her comb back, which is what is inside the box. And she offers her the one thing that Keela couldn't have any other way, which is a wish. And there's only one thing she wants, which is her mom back. So it's kind of the crux of the story, and also the idea of grief and love and consequences and choices. So there's all of these things, emotions kind of wrapped up in this hopefully fun story that kids are reading, and really full of a lot of action and adventure.
It is full of adventure. And not a predictable kind of adventure either. I know I didn't have any idea what was going to happen next. And so it's just, I read it cover to cover in one sitting. It was just a total page turner. I have lots of questions about how you did that with the tension, by the way, but we will talk about that later. One of the things that you do in this book is that you start it with a storytelling refrain, almost like a call and response. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that. And then please, could you read a tiny bit from the beginning of your book?
Yeah, I'd love to. So the book is told in 2 points of view. So there's Keela's point of view, and then there's also Ophidia, who's the sea woman, her points of view. And all of the chapters that are in Ophidia's voice start off with the refrain, Qrik Crack, this is a story. And they end with kind of a similar circle back to Qrik Crack, the story is put on you. And where that comes from, so a lot of the research that I started doing when I was thinking about how to tell the story, and there was a lot of back and forth about whether to have 2 voices or one, but when I decided that I needed to have both, I wanted Ophidia's chapters to feel very much like you were in a story, in a folk tale that was being told. And so the refrain Qrik Crack is common in many Caribbean islands. It's kind of like you mentioned call and response. So it's like a cue that storytellers will use when they're sharing a story. And in the book, I mentioned this with, there's a character who's a storyteller, and she kind of explains, or Keela's remembering the explanation of, when the storyteller says Qrik, the audience is supposed to say crack. And how loudly and enthusiastically they reply, it tells the storyteller how much they want the story. And so there's definitely this interaction back and forth between the storyteller and the listeners. And again, it comes from really some West African traditions that migrated to the Caribbean, during the transatlantic slave trade, and different islands have different variations and they have different frames. So Qrik Crack is not the only one, but it's a common one on a few of the islands. So that was really fun to use. And I feel like it, people have told me that because Ophidia doesn't have the same number of chapters as Keela, that when they get to one of those chapters, it's like, ooh, something magical is going to happen.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it did. It actually had a feeling a little bit like what I imagine. Well, actually, I know this because I found sea glass, but when you find that piece of sea glass and you have that moment, there's lots of pebbles on the beach, but those are special. So those chapters did feel very much like that.
Oh, that's great. So I can start off then with chapter 1. And so you'll hear that Qrik Crack right at the beginning. And so now you know kind of what that is, and know automatically who's speaking and whose point of view is that chapter. So I'll read that, and a little bit, which chapter 1 is very short, and then a little bit of chapter 2. Chapter 1, Qrik Crack. I say Qrik, you say crack. Qrik Crack. This is a story. Down past the islands lit by the sun, beyond twilight swells of dusky sea, through midnight veils of the crushing abyss, another world hides under the waves, the other side of the mirror, as it's known. Through these depths swam a sea woman, The full moon rose and spilled its milk into the water, and light glimmered over dark brown skin. Her scales flashed green and gold. Foreboding drifted on the tide and urged her on. When she reached the cavern, the quiet struck her first. No gentle trill greeted her as it usually did. In her hiding place, only a broken tumble of rocks and stones remained. Hope dissolved as she groped through the cavern, trembling. Her tail fin thrashed as she plunged her arms into every corner. But the silence told her the box was gone. Her pupils narrowed to dangerous slits. The sea woman rode the cold current into the briny deep. She would reclaim the box, and what was inside, she must. Time and tides would decide. Qrik Crack. The story is put on you. Chapter 2, Sinking Sand. The note waited on the kitchen table. Keela didn't even have to pick it up or read Pop's blocky print to know what it said. Her fingers hesitated over the paper. She and Pop hadn't gone diving or done anything normal together in months. She missed the salty mist on her face and the trampolining waves. Keela lifted the note and balled it in her fist. She took a deep breath and then shut the door of the empty house. The gravel crunched under Keela's feet as she crossed the street into a dense patch of trees. A foot-worn path wound its way between towering cabbage palms and sandbox trees. The gully sloped, and she stepped around the snaking roots of a bearded fig. Leaves rustled overhead. A monkey skittered across a bough. With the push of a branch, the forest ended. Keela looked out at the waves lapping the shore, the beach, the one place that felt like home. She walked along the water's edge, her canvas bag hanging lightly from her shoulder. When Keela was 5, she had found the first piece of sea glass, blue like a cloudless sky. "You found a mermaid's tear," Mom had said. "Let's try to find a whole rainbow." They had found every color but orange, the rarest. And now Keela stayed up at night thinking about that last piece, Mom's piece. Keela peeked into her bag at what she had collected that week. Several pieces of sea glass, sharp edges worn away by water and sand. The colors rippled like the surf, translucent green, white, and a piece that glowed golden amber. Her mother had taught her to make jewelry from these gems of the sea. When something caught her eye, she tried to imagine how a person could wear it. A charm hanging from a crocheted necklace, wrapped in wire to make an anklet. She never knew exactly what she was going to make until she got started. In these broken bits of glass, trash to some, Keela saw possibilities, the broken made beautiful. She took out a piece and held it to the sky. Green brightness spilled softly into her hand. She remembered the old island folktale about sea glass. Could sadness really make something so beautiful? I'll stop there.
Goodbye. Good night, everybody. That's it. That's all we got. That's all we need. I feel like I want to reread it now.
Well, and I have. So I got this. Oops, can't see it. Piece
Oh,
of
the sea
orange
glass.
sea glass. Yeah. So
Did you
there,
find
it is rare. I didn't find it. I wish. Well, I found it on Etsy. It is. It's neat though. But yeah, one of the things that when I was doing the research was that orange is the rarest because there weren't many bottles that were mass produced in that color, and so when you find one, it's a lucky find because there's not many of them, at least naturally made ones.
Did you have, I mean, this is sort of a big question, but did you have the majority of the story arc in your mind when you started writing this? I mean, sometimes people see the whole thing and sometimes you start with a little seed. I guess I'm wondering which sort of what did you have, I guess? What did you know when you
Yeah.
that prompted you to start it?
I tend to be a person, I think, that thinks about like premise and plot a little bit more than character. And so I had more of the idea um, that a girl finds a mermaid's comb and makes a wish. But I actually imagined the character of Ophidia first. Like she was much more clear to me than Keela. Like I had to kind of work backwards and think about, okay, so there's this mermaid and she's angry about something, and she's probably been wronged by people. And so then she comes in contact with this girl. And so what is the girl like? And so I kind of worked, in response to like their motivations a little bit. But yeah, and I didn't, I wrote a little bit out of order. So I do remember that the first scene that I wrote was actually something like in the middle of the book, maybe middle to 2/3 into the book. It's one of Ophidia's scenes where she, is coming out of the water, and she's, there's the storm of kind of her emotions going on, and
Oh,
she's
yes.
climbing up the hill. That was the first
Oh,
scene that I
yes.
wrote.
Oh my
So
goodness. No wonder
much
you
more
started with
like
that.
vivid in my imagination, and very like, again, with like her emotion was kind of clear and strong to me, and so that kind of guided me, kind of their interaction with each other.
That's so interesting because it, it's a very brave, bold thing to have her point of view in the book. She's dangerous. She's an
Mhm.
adult. She's um I don't know. It's like but what it does, I think, for the reader, at least in my reader experience, is that it gives this depth to the storyline, the connection, right, of their parallel journeys that are going to intersect at some point, and then who knows what happens after that. But
I know. It
did you,
wasn't.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it was such a hard decision to um, decide like how to tell the story, and like whether, even though I had her character first and like had this idea and I wrote that scene first, it was very much like you said, a risk and not something that I had seen. So I started this book in 2013. So it was long before like a lot of other stories that have, either alternating perspectives with like a different kind of, narrator, especially like an older one. I hadn't really seen it until a little bit later. Um, so, a lot of feedback I got about like, as I was trying to learn craft, because again, when I started writing, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I tried to, study and read books and take classes, and, middle grade, like you need to use the child's point of view and adults shouldn't be telling the story. And it was like, but when I take those chapters out, I felt like I lost something. And so there was a lot of back and forth though, but whether they belonged in there or whether if I kept them, if I should start with her voice instead of Kilo's voice. So I think
Ooh,
it ended
so
up in a good place, but it was
yes,
tricky.
yes, my vote is yes. So, I'm asking this a little bit out of order, but I'm just interested in, you said that things changed a lot in the revision. So I can't imagine the story starting any other way, but did you flip flop about the starting with that, with her point of view?
I did. And it's funny because I've been talking about like the journey of the book more lately, obviously. And one of the things that I shared my first draft with some students, and I was showing them how the draft changed from the beginning until now. And one of the big changes I told them about was that what is now the last chapter of the book in some early revisions was chapter 1. And so, there's a scene at the end where Keela is diving. She finally goes diving, like what you see the note that her dad says, come, let's go
Yeah.
diving. And she hasn't been doing it. That scene at one point was chapter 1. And I said, you know what, I think I need to put Ophidia first, but then it changed how Keela found the comb. And so I'm like, I'm going to repurpose that scene and put it at the end. And I think it really did kind of like bring everything back full circle. But revisions can change things in a lot of different unexpected ways sometimes.
Yeah, revision is kind of its own magical world, I find. So I want to go back to the Caribbean folktales that play such a lovely, almost musical thread throughout the book, and there is such a the way they do it is like a story within the story, right? They are themselves stories, but they are also a piece of sort of what's carrying you along in Keela's story. And I wonder, how did you decide to do that? Did you do a lot of research? Is it, did you have a sense of the kind of folklore that you wanted to create? Is it, I want to hear a little bit about how you approached that piece of it.
Yeah, I know, like when I was thinking about like stories to incorporate, once I decided that Keela's mother was going to be a collector of stories. So there's a character in the book, Miss Innes, who is like a storyteller herself. And Keela's best friend is kind of like learning how to be a storyteller. And then Keela's mother is a collector. So she listened to lots of stories when she was growing up, and she decided to record and save them. So she'd go around and she'd interview people. And so once I decided that that was her occupation, kind of saving these traditions, I looked into like a lot of like story, just like the storytelling frames that I mentioned, but then also stories. And I asked like my family members like what stories they remembered. And so there's a scene where Keela has this old book of folk tales, and she's flipping through and remembering stories that she's read with her mother, and things like the Heart Man is mentioned, who, this really scary kind of boogeyman character who, children should go to bed or the Heart Man's going to come and steal your heart. And then he drags it through the street in his bag. And my dad, he'd say, yeah, there's this story about the, Heart Man, and there's stories about duppies who are like spirits. And so some of just like that collecting of ideas, there's a few stories that like I would hear like when there were mermaids, a lot of times there's a story involving like a fisherman spotting a mermaid. And so that story that I have in the book, where Miss Annis tells a story of a fisherman who finds a mermaid's comb, is kind of inspired by other stories like that I've heard of, like, making a wish. And, so it's what gets Keela thinking about, maybe this comb I found, maybe it's also magical, and maybe, something to worry about and something to kind of hope for. So there was just like all sorts of rich things that I could pull from. And even thinking about like having a mermaid story set in the Caribbean, I pulled from a lot of legends and, stories of like characters that, usually we think of mermaids as being very European. So like The Little Mermaid and Hans Christian Andersen, and, even the Disney version, fair hair and skin. And there's a whole tradition of water spirits and water deities from West Africa that again have migrated to the Caribbean. And so Ophidia, is kind of inspired by the deity Mami Wata, who is like this West African water deity that is very much, kind of fickle, and that can bring you luck, but can also, punish people who, aren't respectful. And she's very, she carries a snake on her shoulders. And so that inspired me also with a lot of the description of Ophidia, that she's very snake-like in her movements. And even her name, Ophidia, is actually the scientific name for the family of reptiles that are snakes. Like her name actually is Snake.
Oh,
if you Google Ophidia.
You how you got her name. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's a scientific name for the whole family of snakes. So all of those kind of things I tried to pull in and kind of crafting that character.
Oh, she's such a good character. Scary.
She
But
is.
also,
It's like there's a lot of misunderstanding
mhm,
between her and characters and being misunderstood. And
mhm.
yeah, but she is scary.
I was gonna say, but scary, but with humanity to her. You give us,
Yeah.
I mean, that's another piece of the book I liked so much is the way that you give us the emotional side to all of the characters, really, including her, and that there's so you feel like you have the whole coin, not just one side. And the
Yeah.
story feels richer for that.
Well, and I feel like that's one of the things that came through revision. A big thing was I feel like, in my first drafts, she was very much kind of the villain and, the scary mermaid, but you didn't really understand her and why she was the way she was. And so I think that the revision process helped me think of more about her backstory and like
Mhm.
her interactions with people and what would make her react the way she does, and how she sees like what Keela wants and she understands it, but she's also kind of resistant to interacting with her too much because she's has like her own history of like trusting
Right.
humans. So
So I want to ask you about character development in general. So I hear you on the, figuring out what you do and do not yet know about your characters in order to write them in a way that conveys that depth of knowledge that you as the author have. But I'm wondering about the other characters as well. Do you have like, where did they come from? Did you base them on people that you know? Are you pulling from, like you said, creating, starting with Ophidia, but you created Keela as a companion to this character you had a really strong feeling about. So how I'm sort of interested in it. Are there any interesting differences in the ways that you created the characters? Because they're all very real. I mean, they
thank
have
you.
a role and a depth, and they're part of this journey. So I'm curious to hear
Yeah.
about that.
I think they came in different ways, and I think some of them were definitely like in response to the different characters, like in response to Keela, like who is the circle of people like around her. And so, again, when I was thinking about this girl who has a wish, like what would she wish for? What's a really big wish? What would a child who was given this opportunity want? And when I eventually settled on, she'd want her mom back. If she had lost her mom, she'd want her mom back. That's a very like normal, natural thing. Um, so then I would start to think about, okay, so then she's with her dad. What's her dad like? And names of characters got, I think, pulled from people I know, from either family members or so like the dad's name is Henderson, Hendy, and I had an uncle who his brother was Hendy, and I always thought that was such a fun, interesting name. And then Keela's mother is Rose, and Rose was my grandmother. So, but then Miss Innes is also, there's some qualities of my grandmother in her, as like with her cooking and all of that. So I think there's a little bit of like people I know, also thinking about like once I kind of think about these characters, who would they need in their life? Who would like support and like give them the things that they need, but who also maybe would push them a little bit.
Mm,
Um, so I think about like the character of Lissy, who's Keela's friend, was definitely one who I developed probably the last once everybody else I think was kind of in there earlier on. And I realized that, Keela I had an opportunity with that character to, there was a point where one of my critique partners said, well, she's not in there very much. Like, I think you need to either make her in there more or take her out. So it's kind of like, what do you want? And I realized I needed to keep her. And so I had to develop her into her own person. What were the things that she likes? What is she good at? How would she help Keela and maybe push her a little bit, challenge her a little bit, but also support her? So yeah, kind of like they're all like little in orbit of each other and kind of
yeah.
interacting.
Yeah. I mean, it's so striking how much work it is to write these great books, these great stories. It's so much, there's
Uh,
so much intention in every subplot, every thread, every person that you include has to, you're right, has to have their own story, has to bring their own things to the table and serve a purpose for, your protagonist and your
yeah. And it's a lot of fun doing that, but yes, it was especially my being the first novel that I like worked through, and for a very long time, the from the 2013, beginning of the very first draft until, all of the revisions. It took me learning to write along with
Mm.
trying to write this story.
How many revisions do you know? Would you say?
I would say I had probably lost count. There was times where I revised parts of it. I got into that writer's rut, early writer's rut, like of revising the beginning over and over or to the middle but not finishing the story. And so I had to learn, like, no, you need to finish the story and then you can figure out what else needs to be done. I went through at least I was in a mentorship program, so I did a pass with, obviously before that I had revised, but I did a pass with my mentors, and then we did, my agent and I, when I was finally agented, we did 3 passes together, and then I did probably like 2 passes with my editor, so a lot, but
Yep.
um, it's just, but each revision got like those layers in. And I think about, like, for example, the ending of the story, without giving anything away, has changed multiple times. Like there's been multiple iterations of like, how does the story end? And kind of, again, how I mentioned that the last chapter used to be the first chapter. The current ending of the novel is a version of the first ending I ever wrote, because there were things that I
Oh,
didn't think worked with the story because it was in the early draft. And after all of the work that we did, like with the character, especially Ophidio's character, I think that made that first ending able to work because we'd done so much work on making her a relatable character that you could understand, and then that helped the ending.
isn't that
Um,
interesting?
yeah.
Yeah. Ah, so interesting. I love to hear stories about how and what changes with people's process, because sometimes I think your subconscious is ahead of the game in some areas, but then you're right, you have to fill in fill it out, I guess.
Yeah, like figure out what needs to be put in place in order for something to work.
Yep.
So that took some time.
And so when you are not being a novelist, you are a teacher, I hear.
I am.
And can you tell us a little bit about what role your teaching and your kids played in the development of this book?
Yeah, a pretty big part. I think I mentioned it in the acknowledgement that so when I wrote this novel in 2013, 2 things. One was I did it as part of the NaNoWriMo challenge. So, National Novel Writing Month. The goal is to try to write a novel in 30 days. And when I did that, I also was implementing the Young Writers Program in my classroom. So, like the kid version of NaNoWriMo. So, it was my second attempt at NaNoWriMo. The first time I failed miserably. And the second time I, brought my kids in again and said, okay, I'm going to write with you all. We're going to, you're all going to write your stories. You're going to see me writing with you. My goal is 50,000 words because I'm a grown up and that's what they are making me do. You can set your goal to whatever you feel like is, reasonable for you. And so we wrote together. So those kids that were in my class are now college freshmen.
Oh,
So
wow.
they were 5th graders when we wrote together, which is kind of fun. But yeah, so I definitely have like used like the community idea of writing and tried to model kind of like
Mhm.
what it writing should look like, and like you should do this for, you know just pushing yourself, what you enjoy, fostering your creativity, and then they see me doing it along with them, not just as an assignment that they're being made to do. Really kind of built like this community spirit. And so I've done it every year. And now that, like, as my manuscript kind of went through the process, I would share things with them, and I'd share feedback I got sometimes from like critique editors that I might have interacted with, and said, see, this is what, like, a professional editor said. We talk about like how to give a good critique to each other in class. So I've tried to use myself as a model a lot
I love that
with my
so
students.
much. That's so powerful, to not just receive the instruction, but to see you trying and being part of
Yeah.
it in front of them. I think that's hugely powerful.
Yeah,
You,
it's been great. And they, like I said, I sometimes will make myself the guinea pig and say, okay, you're going to do this with your partners a little bit, but I want you to practice on me. So here's something short to read, and give me a sandwich feedback, something you like, something you would suggest, and then something you liked. And so I think it's really helped kind of us, develop together.
so, and, as I think your perspective as a debut novelist too is a good one on the importance of your writing community or the creative community. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think people sometimes think, writers are hold off in their little dark room with their desk and their laptop or their scratchy pencil. And I think it's actually quite the opposite of that. I mean, certainly that does happen, but could you speak a little bit about your experience having a community,
Yeah.
a creative
Oh
community?
yeah. It's I think definitely like the stereotype of, writers with their cup of tea or cup of coffee and just like typing away. And I've found that like the first thing I did when I decided I wanted to try to write something, and I didn't really know, teaching writing and literature is different than writing it yourself. And so um, I sought information. And I remember I had gotten an award at school that came with like a stipend, and I could spend it on whatever I wanted, which was really helpful. And so I looked for writing organizations and joined some, organizations like SCBWI at the time. And then I also um, signed up for conferences. I found a critique group that was in my area that I used to live in Kentucky. And so I had a critique group that we met face to face. And, I bought craft books, but the people that like who actually read my work, like my first little baby drafts of things, like were so kind and helpful. And, you don't know what you don't know. And I remember writing something, a totally different manuscript, and I had like adult POVs and I had like the young person POV, and I was giving different people's thoughts. And I remember one of the critique group members were like, well, like this is called head hopping because like you're going from this person's thought to that person's thought. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so those people have been wonderful, and I'm still friends with them now, even though I don't live in the same state anymore. It's been great to have, online groups now that can kind of serve that purpose. I'm, in some groups on, different websites, and now I'm in a debut group. And so I'm meeting people who are from some all over the world, but, all trying to, putting out their books this year. And we've kind of subdivided ourselves because the group is so big. It's over like 300 people.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's like, okay, so the middle grade people, let's get to know each other, and we have a channel on our Slack group. And the people who live in New England, get together, and the people who are BIPOC get together. So that's been wonderful. The Quayle Conference, which is a conference in New York, put on by the Quayle Journal, Quayle of Color of Children's Literature, has been an amazing group of people. I think they've had their 10-year anniversary, and I've been going for at least 6 years.
Oh, wow.
And it's really just like a wonderful affinity space because there's
Mm.
not that many BIPOC writers, that we're so spread out. So it makes you sometimes feel like you're the only one or one of just a handful of people. But then you come together at a conference like that where, like there's 1,000 people and it's like, they're all Black and brown people and they're all writing kidlit, and kind of just has that affirming, feeling of like, we're all working together and making such a difference in the kinds of books that kids are getting. So just a lot of wonderful different groups that kind of serve different purposes for me. But all those people have been, rooting me on and giving me feedback, and have been so helpful in the journey with this book.
That's wonderful. I'm remembering Kate DiCamillo talked about how she never really knows what her books are about until the kid readers tell her what they're about. And that it's a learning experience for her every time. So I wonder if you have had any surprises or any new pieces of knowledge maybe bestowed upon you by your child readers. I say this knowing your book has been out for all of 2 weeks.
I know, for just a short while. I mean, the kids that have read, it's funny, so most of the kids that I've read I actually teach. So like they're my students who, I had 3 copies of my ARC in the school library, so a few kids had read that advanced version, and then when the book came out, I've had a few students bring it in and say, I've read your book this weekend. And some of the I've gotten more questions than like kind of pronouncements from them. So one student asked me, like, why is it so sad? Like, and I was surprised that she didn't say scary, because I worried about that a little bit. Like, is it too scary in parts? But she's like, why is it so sad? And she's like, it was really good, but it was sad in parts. And I was like, oh, well, the characters go through like a journey, and there's like a hopefulness at the end. So I'll be interested to hear more. I got actually one interesting thing was a student who's he's a child of a colleague. He wrote a note to me and gave it to his dad to give to me, because his dad's like, well, I know the author, I probably could get her a note. So he sent that in, and it was really sweet. And it said, your book seemed to end on seems to be like it's setting up a sequel. He's like, is there going to be a sequel? And he's like, I think Keela and Lissy are going to make jewelry out of mermaid's tears. And then this other character he mentions, he's like, and I think he's going to steal them, like, and sell the mermaid's tears. And I was like, I don't know. I haven't thought of a sequel, but I've had more than one kid talk about, is there going to be another story? But he's had it all mapped out. Like there was going to be this like theft of jewelry sequel.
I love it. A heist, perhaps.
Yes.
That's great. I had a good question I was going to ask you. I'm wondering, I remember being struck by RJ Palacio talked about writing wonder, and when she had a full-time job and she was a parent, and she set the clock and woke up at midnight and wrote until 3 a.m. in order to write that book. So I'm feeling like there must be some sort of trick for you also, because you are a teacher during a global pandemic and a parent and a cat mom and all the other things you're doing. What does that look like for you? How do you, and she always says, you don't find the time, you make the time. And that was her example. And I think that that's true, but I'm wondering what that looks like for you. Yeah. How do you make the time to do this?
I think it's shifting and it's changing. So like A Comb of Wishes was acquired at the very end of 2019. So it was December 2019 when HarperCollins acquired it. So it was written by that point. And so leading up to like all the writing and the revision work, like, yes, I was still teaching full time, but it wasn't kind of like the situation that we're in now, which is so hard right now for all of us teachers. And definitely has affected like my work on like my next manuscript. But that being said, I think I tried to work with like my schedule. Like one is kind of like I learned that, there are no rules. Like people will tell you these rules in writing about like, no adult POV characters. And so the other one is like, you should write every day. If you're a writer, you should write every day. And I would feel guilty if I didn't. And then I realized, that wasn't helpful. That I should write when I, make some time, but like make time when it makes sense, for me and like the kids and their schedule. So NaNoWriMo, like I've done that like every year since I, mentioned 2012 was the very first time. And so I always like would push myself really hard during November to try to draft something. And I would I would be with the 5 a.m. writers, and I would stay up late, and I, try to do like put up like a really big push. But the rest of the year was just much more low key. I would write, usually on the weekends. And then like as teachers, we have our breaks, school breaks. And so writing over school breaks, trying to get maybe something done in the summertime, really like was how I was able to do a lot more work and not guilt myself that I couldn't sit down every evening, because sometimes there's, homework that I need to help kids with, or taking them to appointments, or grading. As an English teacher, I've always got tons of grading to do. So yeah, I just tried to work around my schedule. And what I found lately with now that I'm kind of in the publishing world and working on another book, is to communicate now with deadlines make things different, but to communicate with my editors and others about like what feels like manageable, and like what kind of time I need, and if that changes, to communicate with them about, okay, I thought things would be better at X time, but like this pandemic is still going on, so I still need a little bit more time. And so I think everybody, if you're just open and honest with the communication, like they can be flexible. So that's what I try to do. I just try to break things into small chunks, but also know that sometimes there's just too much going on, and I just have to take care of those things and then come back to my writing.
Well, I'm glad you're giving yourself some grace around that, because I think the should language isn't helpful to anybody. And I think, knowing what kind of a writer you are and how you work is the key to all of it, right? I mean, that's whatever you did for this one, do it again. We can't wait.
Try to work on that.
I'm just we have a couple questions from our lovely viewers. How did you get the idea for the story to be set in the Caribbean? And actually, I would love to hear you talk about Saint Rita, because Saint Rita is fictional.
Yeah. Yes, it is. So I mentioned, like, I tend to think like premise first. And so, being a classroom teacher, I, lots of middle grade books around me. So when I thought about writing a story for, this NaNoWriMo project that I need to do with my students, I needed a story idea. I'd read The Tale of Emily Winsnap by Liz Kessler, and I thought, oh, a mermaid story, that would be fun. And then I think around that same time, I reread Coraline by Neil Gaiman, and I was like, ooh, I love spooky stories, and like the girl, she's got to be brave and go through this challenge. And so that was kind of like premise, like beginning. But I thought if I wrote a mermaid story, it would make sense to me to set it in the Caribbean, because that's my family heritage. So my dad was born in Barbados, and he immigrated to the United States, before I was born. And so, but here where I live in Boston is where all of my dad's family was. So, we always had like, the family get-togethers, and we had the music, and we had the food, and all of that was just, and there's a large West Indian population, Caribbean population here in the Boston area. So like there was, even at like church, everybody, I would hear the accents of people. So that part felt like very natural. Like if I'm going to have this mermaid story, mermaids should be in the Caribbean, of course. And Saint Rita essentially is Barbados with creative license taken. So I thought, I want to be flexible. So I'm going to call it a different name. And I really like, people have told me they've Googled Saint Rita, because they're like, it must be a real place. And they've looked it up, and they're like, it's not coming up on the map.
I believe it.
And I actually, I thought like it was very hard, because I wanted to come up with an island name that was not another island. So I like would think of something, and then I'd Google it. Oh, darn, there's an island with that name, and keep looking. And name actually I landed on because when I lived in Kentucky, there was a parish, Catholic parish named Saint Rita right near our house. And I was like, Saint Rita, that sounds kind of like Caribbean. And I Googled it and there was no island of that name. So
Perfect.
that's what I went
Perfect. You're gonna have to start your own tourism board now.
with. I
Everyone's gonna
know.
want to go. So two questions related to character, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but one is, are any of your characters based on anyone real? And the second one is, what parts of Keela, the character of Keela, remind you of yourself?
I think for the first question, there's elements of people that are in some of the characters, but no one's like totally based on anyone I know. So like, for example, my Keela's dad, Pop, is a dive coach and a dive instructor and has his business. And I think there's parts of him that like I drew from like my dad. My dad, loved the water and the ocean. He like, I have pictures of him like spearfishing. That was something he used to do when he lived there. And he moved back after he retired. He's since passed, but so I think like his love of the water, that was one thing I kind of, gave to her dad. As I mentioned, like some names of different characters, come from like family members. And then as far as like Keela, how she's like me, I think I tend to be like a crafty person. I don't make jewelry, but I knit. I've got my knitting here on the side, and I like to make things. And so I think that aspect of like kind of being a maker and being creative, I think is something that maybe a little bit of me is in her with that character trait.
That. How did you choose her name, Keela?
I knew when I knew that it was going to be kind of based in Barbados, the Saint Rita. I actually like looked up like popular girls' names in Barbados, and I remember asking one of my cousins who lives in Barbados now. I said, okay, so I've got this name. Like, is that a name that like you hear sometimes? How would you pronounce this name? And so, but yeah, I went the old-fashioned, baby name search type thing, but thinking what I liked and how it would sound.
This hour has gone by so fast. I have just one other question I just wanted to ask you about is that the tension and the pacing of this story is so spot on. It's like you start with a bang or a gasp, as I mentioned earlier, and then you don't let go. That said, you do give us like the ebb and flow of the emotional reprieve, right? And so there are fun parts and sad parts, and it does like take you. It doesn't, it's not like you can't breathe for 300 pages, but
right.
But that part, is that something that it's so good. How is that? Was that something that you worked on through revision? Is it something that you felt as initially as part of the storyline? Like, how did you do that? That's what I want to know.
It definitely something that I worked on in revision, and with like the mentors that I mentioned. So I had applied to, I guess this was 2017. So I had a whole draft. I kind of worked on it on my own. Had some people completely read it, which that was a huge thing to finish it, and had other partners read the whole thing. And then I applied to author mentor match, and then also to a mentorship called Writing in the Margins, which I don't think is active anymore, but I was accepted into both. And I tried to pull out of one because I thought, oh, I got into this one, I'll leave a space for another writer. And the person who ran it was author mentor match said, oh, but like our mentor like was really excited about your story, and we don't have a problem with you being in two mentorships if you want to be, as long as you're willing to work on it with both people. And I was like, sure. And the nice thing about doing that was that both mentors were different. They were both published authors, but one was a middle grade author and one was a YA author. And I feel like they had different strengths that they helped me with. So as far as pacing, my mentor, Sarah, who is a YA author, really gave me like help with keeping the pacing tight. There are places where, the scenes like just didn't really serve a purpose. And so, we would cut things and then we think about what needed to be expanded. And she also had a great eye for like the character, and like so she helped me develop Ophidion's character a lot with like how to create suspense through that character and through action. And then my other mentor, Robin, being middle grade, helped me a lot with voice. And so she would read something and say, is that something you really think a 12-year-old would think, or a 12-year-old would say, or would they use those words? And she nitpicked a lot of things, and I was like, okay, yeah, you're right, because my ethereal voice would come in sometimes and I would throw these big words in there, and she's like, but does that, does it really sound that way? You think that would sound authentic? So it was great to have both of their perspectives on it.
Oh, Lisa, tell us you're writing another book. I just need to hear from you. Please tell us you're writing.
I am working on another book. I have pushed the deadline a few. Like I said, communicating is really great with your publishing team. But yes, it should be, hopefully it'll come out fall of next year. But it's another standalone fantasy. And I kind of think of it like a princess in a tower story. So it's not a retelling, but it's kind of like a take on this, trope of somebody's in a tower and they have to be found. There's a quest. But I also, setting was important, kind of like how setting is important in this book. The setting of that, it's like inspired by West Africa. So, it's princess in a tower with West African influences. So
I
that's
can't
the story
wait for
idea.
that. I can't wait for that. All right. Well, I'm just gonna pencil your name in for next fall. Have a redo of our conversation for that purpose.
Yeah.
And then just before we go, I always love to ask what you're reading. Are you reading anything great we should add to our lists?
Yeah, I am in a book club, and we always read like YA and middle grade books. So I'm really excited because I've heard about this one a lot. A Lat's Away by Darcy Little Badger. This was her debut, and won a ton of awards. I think it was like a Nebula finalist. And so it's fantasy, indigenous fantasy, where the girl can like speak to the ghosts of animals. So I'm in chapter 1, and it's really very interesting. She's got such an interesting line about her dog that it said he had been her best friend for 17 years, 12 alive and 5 dead.
Oh man.
So I'm like, oh, sounds so interesting.
I mean, gotta get that one. I'll add it to my list. Well, thank you so much for being here, Lisa. It's such a treat to talk to you. I'm just thrilled about all your success with the Comb of Wishes, and it's just going to get more fun, I think, as more and more people get a chance to read it. Speaking of which, we have copies, not only copies, but signed copies at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton. You can also pick them up if you're not local at silverunicornbooks.com. Take a look at the website also for our next set of wonderful author events, just like this one. We are just so happy to have had you. And I want to say Qrik Crack to you, audience. The story is put on you. So go get your copy. Sweet. Comb of Wishes. Lisa Stringfellow.
Thank you for
so
having
much.
me.
Such a treat. Good night, everybody.
Thank you to the audience. Bye-bye.